Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Melanin Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Valarie Went, and I want to talk to you about several things in this episode. For the past few weeks, I have been going through waves of grief. At first, I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't know how to describe it, but I knew it was different from the norm. It felt like I was taking L after L after L. I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. It was just an overall sadness about the state of America. We as a nation was coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And I had anger which stemmed from deep sorrow and wounds I felt from the racial injustice we experience daily as African Americans. You see, even with a new president and a new administration in office, not much has changed. The Biden administration hasn't gotten the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act passed. What saddened me even more so is that so many of our people didn't even understand what the bill is. So, with that being said, I decided that I need to tell you guys more about the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It's a bill that addresses a wide range of policies and issues regarding policing practices and law enforcement accountability. It increases accountability for law enforcement misconduct. It restricts the use of certain policing practices. It enhances transparency in data collection. And it establishes best practices and training requirements. The bill enhances existing enforcement mechanisms to remedy violations by law enforcement. Among other things, it does the following. It lowers the criminal intent from willful to knowing or reckless to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct in federal prosecution. It limits qualified immunity, and I told y'all about that. That's why a lot of officers get off because of that qualified immunity. This bill would limit qualified immunity as a defense to liability in a private civil action against law enforcement officers. And the bill would grant administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice or the DOJ in pattern or practice investigations. It establishes a framework to prevent and remedy racial profiling by law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels. It also limits the unnecessary use of force and restricts the use of no-knock warrants, chokeholds, and other holds that may be deadly. The bill creates a national registry, the National Police Misconduct Registry, to compile data on complaints and record records of police misconduct. It also establishes new reporting requirements, including on the use of force, officer misconduct, and routine police practices such as stops and searches. Finally, it would direct the DOJ to create uniform accreditation standards for law enforcement agencies and require law enforcement officers to complete training on racial profiling, implicit bias, and the duty to intervene when another officer uses excessive force. So we could really use this bill, the laws that would come from this bill. We could really use it. This bill was passed in the U.S. House of Representatives on March 3rd in 2021. However, the legislation collapsed in the Senate. You see, Joe Biden and these Democrats are on this thing about accomplishing goals or promises to the American people only by bipartisan efforts. In other words, and in my opinion, Biden and his cohorts want to negotiate with American extremists on the right. It is insane because they know that Republicans buy time. They run out the clock. Yet they, meaning the Democrats, continue to go down this road and nothing is accomplished. Needless to say, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act did not advance in the U.S. Senate. It never came to the floor for debate because negotiations failed between the author of the bill, which is U.S. Representative Karen Bass, and she's out of California, the U.S. Senator Tim Scott, a Republican out of South Carolina. He's the sole black Republican in the United States Senate, and U.S. Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat out of New Jersey, and he's the sole black Democrat in the U.S. Senate. Okay, so we need to change that. Now, let me say this. The United States House of Representatives did their job with Representative Karen Bass spearheading the bill. It was in the U.S. Senate where the bill was placed on ice because there's no path forward in negotiating with Republicans. What is even more infuriating to me is Senator Tim Scott's brainwashing of the necessity of this bill. He doesn't believe America is a racist country. He doesn't believe that. He said it with his own mouth, using his own words. Take a listen.
You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. And it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present.
That is a Republican talking point. Case in point, the same thing was just said by U.S. Senator John Kennedy out of Louisiana, and his Democrat opponent, Gary Chambers, had something to say about it. Take a listen to this clip.
America is not a racist country. We have racists in it.
If a country starts, and in the Constitution, they label a specific race of people as a third of a person, allow them to be property, allow them to be brutalized, raped, and not considered citizens because they were property, takes over 100 years to emancipate them, and then spends another 100+ years terrorizing them. How is that nation not racist?
I'm sure Gary meant to say 3/5 of a person, but I'm sure y'all knew that, and y'all understand the 3/5 compromise when black people were only considered to be 3/5 of a person, or every 3 out of 5 slaves or enslaved Africans were counted for the United States Census, meaning 2 were left out. They were unaccounted for. Okay, so 3/5 of a person. Anyway, the bottom line is this. There is something wrong with the Republicans, and Senator Tim Scott falls lock and step in with the Republican Party. While he is a black man from South Carolina, he is a black man who doesn't think America is racist because that is the Republican ideology or mindset. In addition, U.S. Senator Timothy Eugene Scott is an evangelical Protestant. He is a member of Seacoast Church, a large, predominantly white evangelical church in Charleston. Need I say more? I will say this because it was the majority of white evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump. Okay? But black people being killed by cops and getting away with it is fine with Tim Scott, but not with the general consensus of the American people. The population of South Carolina is just over 5 million people. And their elected senators, Senators Tim Scott and Senator Lindsey Graham, have been vocal obstructionists to the progression of legislation in America. We need to understand that the U.S. senators who are Republican have been the greatest obstructionists to this nation's progress. It is important to understand that the Republicans are in the minority in the Senate, but they will as much power as the Democrats because there are 2 Democrats, Manchin and Sinema, who are not willing to get rid of the filibuster in order to make headway. Simply put, getting rid of the filibuster will rectify getting bills passed with a simple majority, 51 out of 100 senators, with Vice President Kamala Harris being the deciding vote. But we have 2 Democrats who are Democrats in name only. Joe Manchin out of Virginia and Kristen Sinema out of Arizona, which has placed Democrats in an impossible position to get things accomplished. And as it stands, we know with the Byrd rule and the filibuster, in order for a bill to be passed in the Senate chamber, it has to have at least 60 votes. That means all of the Dems must be on board and at least 10 Republicans. The way I see it, getting 10 Republicans to go along with the Democrats on anything is impossible. With that being said, the Constitution of the United States in Article 1, Section 1 tells us how bills are supposed to become law. In layman's terms, it reads, laws begin as ideas. First, a representative sponsors a bill. The bill is then assigned to a committee for study. If released by the committee, the bill is put on the calendar to be voted on, debated, or amended. If the bill passes by a simple majority in the House, like 218 out of 435, the bill moves forward in the Senate. Okay? In the Senate, the bill is assigned to another committee, and if released, debated, and voted on, again, a simple majority, 51 senators out of 100, the bill passes. Finally, a conference committee made of House and Senate members work out any differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill. The resulting bill returns to the House and Senate for final approval. The government printing office prints the revised bill in a process called enrolling. The president has 10 days to sign or veto the enrolled bill. That is how a bill becomes law. The Byrd rule and the filibuster was added in, and it is not in the Constitution. It is a Senate rule that can be removed. Moving on. Now, with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the bill never made it out of committee in the Senate because the negotiation efforts failed. And that was in September of 2021. Okay? Fast forward to what has happened now. On May 25th, 2022, President Biden signed an executive order to advance the effective accounting, policing, and strengthen public safety. Okay? An executive order to advance effective, accountable policing and strengthen public safety. The executive order mandates measures for all federal law enforcement agencies, leveraging the president's direct authority over the executive branch, meaning the EO, the executive order, only deals with law enforcement on the federal level. The EO promotes accountability by establishing a national database of police misconduct. It strengthens patterns and practice investigations. It ensures timely and thorough investigations and consistent discipline. It mandates the adoption of body-worn camera policies. The EO raises standards by banning the use of chokeholds and other restraints that are deadly. Okay? It has to be authorized. Okay? The EO also restricts the use of no-knock entries. It requires new standards that limit the use of force and requires escalation for all federal agencies. The EO restores and expands upon the Obama-Biden administration's restriction of the transfer of military equipment. And see, that's a good thing. That means it just won't fall into the hands of local authorities or state authorities. Okay? Now, we all know that the budgets of state and local law enforcement agencies are large enough where they can buy their own military equipment, but it will not be transferred from federal agencies anymore. The EO supports law enforcement with improved systems and training. It requires an updated approach to recruitment, hiring, promotion, and retention of law enforcement officers. It reimagines the crisis response. It prioritizes officer wellness. It requires new standards for accreditation and for accrediting bodies. It implements a new evidence-informed annual anti-bias training requirement. The EO improves data transparency and oversight of new technologies by tracking data on the use of force incidents, by studying the impact of use of force incidents on communities. It safeguards the use of facial recognition technology and other sophisticated tools. It also enhances data collection and data transparency. Lastly, the executive order reforms a broader criminal justice system by directing a government-wide strategic plan to propose interventions to reform our criminal justice system. It improves conditions of confinement, and it requires full implementation of the First Step Act. And you guys can look that up. Okay? In other words, Biden stayed in his lane. Biden stayed in his lane, which is the executive branch of the government body. We have the judicial branch. That's with the Supreme Court. We have the legislation branch. That's with the two chambers, the House and the Senate. And then we have the executive branch, which is our president and vice president, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we have three government bodies. It's supposed to be a balance of checks and balances, but right now we're having a time with that. So Biden did not make waves with this executive order. He won't be challenged by any states on any of this since it does not affect them. This is a law only for the federal level, for federal law enforcement agencies. It does not include state or local entities, meaning the everyday cops that we see can keep doing the same thing. So we are still fighting those injustices. But we have the power to change things by electing different leaders for our cities, our counties, and our states. We even have power in who is elected on the national or federal levels if we vote. Michelle Obama has this thing that says, when we all vote. Americans have gotten too complacent with not going to vote. Okay? There was let me see if I can find it here. In the last election, okay, 81,268,924 people voted Democrat. 74,216,154 people voted Republican. And over 101,176,932 people didn't vote at all, yet they were registered voters. So we need to get people to vote, okay? Not enough of us participate in the system, okay? Too many Americans have gotten comfortable with the status quo being in charge, and too many Americans, especially Black Americans, Black American men, have gotten dismayed by the political establishment. And let me say this, not all Black American men, it's just a portion, maybe 10%, okay, have gotten dismayed by political establishments. And I mean this two-party system that we have. America has always been a two-party system, okay? So you need to choose one if you want to make a difference, okay? These people are in power because people did not vote. And I will use my own home state as an example. Texas is completely off the chain and has been running amok. Okay, many people label Texas as a red state, meaning it is conservative, right-wing, and Republican. However, I beg to differ. Texas is not a red state. Texas is an oppressed state where gerrymandering has put the minority over the majority. We vote, and it seems like the system is rigged because the gerrymandered maps allow the candidates to choose their voters instead of the voters choosing the candidates. Okay? For instance, in Galveston County, the Republicans gerrymandered out a whole 30-plus year district of predominantly Black and Hispanic voters. They no longer have a seat in the House of Representatives. Okay? They gerrymandered that whole district out. Okay? They played dirty, but the Republicans had tried this before. They tried it before with the same district, and it was overruled. But let me tell you how they did it. They did it with a non-published vote, and they excluded the representative from that area. Okay? So they play the long game. It's asinine, but our votes still matter. Even in this, our votes matter. We still choose who represent us in the United States Congress, especially in the United States Senate. And United States senators hold a lot of power. We still choose who represent us at the county level, county judges, commissioners who represent us at the local level, at the city council representatives, our mayors of our cities, our school board members, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Elections matter. Every last election matters. And so do our votes. Okay? Elections have consequences, and so do our votes. We cannot give up, we cannot give in, and we cannot give out. We have to vote for future generations. Things do not change overnight because the things that we need to change is the policies. And the policies have to be legislated. Okay? So we need to understand that our votes are for future generations, what we would like to see in the future. And for certain things we would like to see now. Because if we want the leadership to change, we have to vote. And that happens immediately. Okay? So whenever we choose not to vote, we leave it up to other people to will our power for us. Or we leave our power sitting on the table. We have to vote. And we must understand that voting is only a tenet in the pathway forward. So it's only one notch in our belt. Okay? Voting doesn't solve everything. We have some other things that go along with the voting. Okay? But voting is one way forward, and we all need to be participating in that. Our vote, especially our black votes, matter. With that being said, be sure to comment, like, share, and click the tiny bell to be notified when a new episode is dropped. The visual podcast is available on YouTube, and you can find the audio versions of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Thank you for joining me. It is always a pleasure. This has been the realest homegirl, Valarie Wynn, and I will talk to you all on the next Melanin Reset podcast. Peace.